It is almost midnight by the time Team Jiraiya arrive back in the village, having resumed their more slowed pace after the attempted assassination by their unknown enemy. The mood is heavy as they retire to Jiraiya's apartment, daring not even to speak in the open for fear of who could be listening in. As soon as they are sure they are safe, Yahiko asks if Jiraiya-sensei is certain the people who attacked them are from within the village. Gravely, Jiraiya nods, saying that it's his business to focus on small details that others wouldn't notice, since that's how he can plot causality. And for that reason, he is certain that the tanto those ninja used were definitely from Konoha. Yahiko flops down with a sigh, saying that still doesn't help them much, since how are they meant to find their enemy with so many people in the village who it could be? Here Conan smiles, telling him to cheer up since the pool of people who might be trying to kill them is actually much smaller than the whole village. Yahiko sarcastically says he's so glad to hear it. But Conan keeps smiling, saying that the attack was an ambush, meaning that whoever's behind it had to know they would be outside the village tonight, as well as a rough idea of where they were going. Jiraiya praises this deductive reasoning, saying that narrows down the suspect significantly. He then lists out the possibilities, saying it had to either be the Hokage, one of the village elders, or one of the shinobi they met at the military encampment. Yahiko, looking to help, suggests that it could have been the gate guards, but Jiraiya tells him that it couldn't for two reasons. First, the gate guards only know who is leaving and when, not where they are going or the details of their mission. And second, whoever is behind this needs to have the influence to attract 5 or 6 co-conspirators, since from battling them, Jiraiya can confirm that their attackers were all real people rather than clones. Yahiko looks saddened by this dismissal, but Jiraiya grins that he likes to see Yahiko using his head and thanks him for contributing. He then asks Nagato if he has any insight to share, and upon hearing his name, the boy jerks up as if coming out of deep thought. Humbly, he apologizes for not really having anything to contribute, before resuming his contemplation. Jiraiya then adds there is one other thing they must figure out to get to the bottom of this assassination attempt: the identity of the target. The kids ask what he means, and Jiraiya explains that while it's probable the enemy would have killed them all if given the chance, that is unlikely to be their true objective. More likely than not, one of them is the enemy's true target, and if they can figure out who, then they can probably figure out why, and that will give them a pretty good idea who the mastermind behind this conspiracy really is. Conan asks if Jiraiya-sensei has any suspicions about who the mastermind is, and Jiraiya admits there are a few names he thinks are more likely, as well as a few he thinks are less likely to be the one, but he's trying not to think about that right now, since he doesn't want to bias himself, otherwise his investigation might be corrupted trying to fit evidence into his own narrative, rather than seeing it for what it really is. Yahiko asks if that means he'll even be treating his own sensei, Old Man Hiruzen, as a suspect, and with a sad smile, Jiraiya nods, saying at this point no one is above suspicion. Conan asks what he'll do if Lord Third is revealed to be the culprit, and Jiraiya through a forced smile tells her not to worry. He gave his word that he'd protect and guide the three of them, and he's not the kind of man who goes back on his promise, even if that means he has to kill his own sensei to fulfill it. The conversation dies after this declaration, the weight of what Jiraiya has said hanging over all of them just as heavily as the attack. After such a long day, Yahiko and Conan head off to bed soon after, falling asleep before their heads even touch the futons. But Nagato remains where he is, still lost in that deep thought. Approaching him, Jiraiya asks what's on Nagato's mind, and the boy explains everything that happened after they split up, before finishing with the way he somehow managed to absorb the lightning jutsu. Jiraiya nods, saying that he's not surprised Nagato did that, since chakra absorption was one of the Sage of Six Paths' famed six-path jutsu. Nagato asks why Jiraiya-sensei never mentioned these before, and the Toad Sage laughingly admits that he wasn't sure if they were tied to the Rinnegan or not, and didn't want to put additional pressure on Nagato in case he couldn't perform the jutsu. Nagato nods his understanding, but says that now that it seems they have their confirmation, he wants to study these six-path jutsu, as well as figure out how to manifest jutsu absorption at will, since he needs to be able to protect Yahiko and Conan like he did tonight. Jiraiya promises that he will help Nagato in any way he can, but for now it's late, and as his sensei, he thinks it's best if he gets some sleep, since they have another long day ahead of them tomorrow. The next morning, Team Jiraiya report to the Hokage's office to give their report on their mission to Hiruzen and the Elders. As per Jiraiya's instruction, no one mentions the assassination attempt, waiting to see if anyone slips up and reveals something they shouldn't. Unfortunately, nothing is ever that easy, and so they are dismissed with congratulations of a job well done by Hiruzen. From here their schedule returns to normal, a mix of D-rank missions and training. Though Yahiko still wishes to emulate his sensei, he also picks up a new field of training, sword fighting, specifically training with the sort of tanto their enemy used against them. After needing to be saved by Nagato in the forest, and Conan figuring out the true meaning behind the attack while he kept making mistakes, he is starting to feel useless, especially since he's supposed to be their leader, and so he endeavors to truly master this type of weapon, so that if someone tries to attack his friends again, he'll be able to protect them. Conan continues to hone her paper ninjutsu in the methodical manner for which she is known, while Nagato shifts his study from the Rinnegan specifically to the Sage of Six Paths, learning about his famed six-path jutsu. He quickly becomes familiar with each of these techniques, those being the Deva path, which grants access to attractive and repelling forces, the Asura path, which allows the user to augment their body, the Human path, which allows the user to read minds at the cost of the target's life, the Animal path, which grants access to a number of summoning creatures, the Predator path, which he has already used to absorb jutsu, and the Naraka path, which allows the user to manifest the King of Hell. However, in spite of all this study, he is no closer to drawing out the Predator path or any other path on command. On top of all of this, Team Jiraiya also continues their investigation into their unknown assailant. Alas, with no real leads beyond their short list of potential suspects, all of whom are either outside their reach or occupy such positions of power in the village they cannot question them, there is precious little they can turn up. Fortunately, a prime opportunity to get a few answers lands squarely in Jiraiya's lap a few weeks after their return. Hiruzen once more calls the Toad Sage into his office, saying that he has another C-rank mission that will require the team to leave the village. Jiraiya asks what it is, and Hiruzen tells him it's to inspect an abandoned hidden sand base for any tactical or otherwise valuable information they might have left behind. Jiraiya asks why his team have been selected for such a mission, and the Hokage explains that it was at the request of Sakamoto Haruke, since with his platoon being redeployed to the front line, he needs a small group of shinobi to assist him, and he liked the way Jiraiya and his team conducted themselves. Resisting the urge to add a suspicious edge to his voice, Jiraiya asks if that's so, laughing that he guesses he must be training his genin right if they've caught the attention of the White Fang. The gutsy Sannin then adds his next line of questioning, asking if 2 Jonin are really needed for a C-rank mission, especially one to an abandoned facility. Hiruzen admits that they aren't, but says that he would have thought Jiraiya would want to accompany his genin squad as a chaperone. Jiraiya laughs that he trusts them to be able to handle themselves for a few days, especially if they have Sakamoto watching over them, plus it'll give him a chance to finish the current chapter he's working on for his book. Hiruzen shrugs that if that's what Jiraiya wants, he'll take him off the mission. Jiraiya thanks his mentor, then heads off to inform his squad of the plan. Naturally, the 3 genin are all shocked at the idea of going on a mission without their sensei, particularly one where their temporary commander will be one of the people they suspect of trying to kill them. However, Jiraiya grins that this is the genius of the plan. By seemingly making themselves vulnerable to Sakamoto, they'll be able to determine his guilt or innocence. Not only that, but since he's staying here, if someone attacks him, then he'll know that he's the target rather than the kids. Nagato and Yahiko nod their understanding of this plan, while Conan asks her sensei to backtrack to his comment about seemingly making themselves vulnerable. Jiraiya calls this a clever pickup, before handing her a scroll. He then explains that he's sealed a shadow clone of himself inside the scroll. If Sakamoto or anyone else attacks them, all they need to do is break the seal on the scroll and the clone will protect them. Nagato, who has come across shadow clones in his reading, asks if the doppelganger only having half of Jiraiya's sensei's power will be an issue. But rather immodestly, Jiraiya retorts that half of his strength is more than enough to deal with pretty much any enemy they may encounter, even the legendary White Fang. Also, if the need arises for them to pass on a message, they can just bring out the clone, tell it what they have to, then hit it on the head with Yahiko's sword, which will transmit the message back to him in an instant. Now knowing that they do have contingency plans, the mood relaxes a bit, and so to celebrate their first mission without him, Jiraiya offers to buy the kids some ramen before they ship out. The next morning, Team Jiraiya depart the village gate. Unfortunately, it would be too suspicious if they travelled any slower than necessary, potentially tipping off their enemy to the fact that they have an idea on their identity, and so they leap from tree to tree at top speed, arriving at Sakamoto's new encampment by midday. The two men then shake hands, with Jiraiya formally handing over command of his team to Sakamoto and wishing his squad good luck on their mission. They all thank him, and moments later Jiraiya vanishes with the body flicker technique. The now Team Sakamoto then set off for their own destination, and there is a tenseness to the group from the moment Jiraiya leaves. However, Sakamoto puts this down to the three genin being nervous about their first mission without their sensei, and so tries to lighten their mood by having them spend the night in an inn, rather than forcing them to camp out on the cold ground. As they all gather in the dining room, one of the waitresses approaches Sakamoto, asking if he's the fabled White Fang of Konoha. Sakamoto smiles that he is, and the woman says that his meal is on the house. Chuckling, Sakamoto muses that he guesses there are some upsides to this war, since he never would have been offered a free dinner before. Konan immediately looks to Nagato, knowing how much it will upset him to hear someone speak flippantly about the war, and though killing intent is radiating off of him, it is Yahiko who pipes up. In a scornful voice, he asks if Sakamoto thinks the girl gave him that because she likes him, or because she's impressed by his title. She didn't. She gave it to him because she's scared of him. She's scared that unless she gives him whatever he wants, he and his buddies from the Hidden Leaf will kill her family, steal anything of value from her homeland, then ravage the rest for fun, just like they did in the Hidden Rain to him and his family. Sakamoto is taken aback by this, admitting that he didn't know, but Yahiko snaps that's because he didn't care enough to know. For those blessed to be from the 5 major nations, war is just a game to see how much they can expand their territory and influence, to win some new titles, and bang their chest if a rival is getting a bit uppity, but nothing to fear, since even if they lose this particular war, they'll win back anything they lost in the next one. But for those in the smaller villages, it's not a game, it's a nightmare, in which they are powerless to do more than watch as everyone and everything they hold dear is devoured in the name of the bigger village's greed. Sakamoto is left in stunned silence by this vitriolic rebuke, so Yahiko goes on, declaring that war is a cruel, stupid, and worthless thing, and those who see it as anything else are just as cruel, stupid, and worthless. And with that, he rises to his feet and storms out of the room, not even touching a mouthful of food, despite the hunger he must be feeling. Yahiko doesn't speak for the rest of the night, or even into the next day, anger at Sakamoto radiating off him like heat. Sakamoto attempts to apologize, but when met by Yahiko's contemptuous glare, acknowledges that the boys' feelings are justified, hoping they can at least work together long enough to complete the mission. Konan and Nagato are similarly angry, but mask it better, with Konan focusing instead on watching Sakamoto for any signs of duplicity, while Nagato uses his Rinnegan to look out for enemies or traps. Eventually they do make it to the Hidden Sand Base, a 2-story tower made out of sandstone, which lives up to its reputation of being abandoned. Team Sakamoto make their way inside, with Konan and Sakamoto heading to one end of the base to catalogue any intel they can find, while Yahiko and Nagato start on the other end. Now that he is out of sight, Yahiko fumes about Sakamoto, calling him a typical warmonger, which Nagato finds himself easily agreeing with. He then offers Yahiko one of his food pills, saying that his friend must be starving and exhausted after travelling 2 days with only Jiraiya Sensei's ramen for energy. Yahiko gratefully accepts, though he does grumble that these somehow taste worse than the spoiled food they would steal from the garbage back home. Nagato chuckles a little that he's right, saying that at least Konoha usually has good food and lots of it. Yahiko agrees, and so the pair set to work. Since the Sand Shinobi left in quite a hurry, there are plenty of valuable documents to be found, and Nagato and Yahiko gather as many as they can carry. When they meet up with Konan and Sakamoto at the base of the stairwell leading to the next level, the White Fang praises the boys for their diligence. He then suggests that they switch teams for this next floor, opting to go with Yahiko, presumably hoping to speak with the boy alone. Yahiko responds with a jerky nod, and the group proceed up the stairs. Turning a corner, the group are given a small fright when they see what they think is a man seated on the bottom step. However, upon closer inspection, they quickly discover that the man is in fact some sort of automaton or puppet. Konan finds this utterly fascinating, having heard from Jiraiya Sensei that the Hidden Sand use puppet soldiers, and so goes in for a closer look. However, Nagato tells her to stop, when his Rinnegan allows him to see minute chakra threads suddenly dart into view, connecting with the puppet's back. The puppet then rises to its feet, and with a cacophonous clang, lunges at Konan. Sakamoto orders the team to fall back, but Yahiko is done taking orders from this guy, and so Tanto raised, leaps in, blocking the puppet's thrust with his blade and protecting Konan. Unfortunately, the puppet has more than simple strikes up its sleeve, as its chest cavity suddenly bursts open, allowing a pair of pincers to shoot out, clamping around Yahiko's arms and torso, pulling him inside. Conan and Nagato cry out for their friend, but are silenced when a man with red hair a shade lighter than Nagato's and a woman with long brown hair emerge from out of view. The chakra threads are connected to the man's hands, making him the puppeteer, while the woman has a demon wind shuriken raised to cover her partner. Both wear the attire and headband of the hidden sand, and in spite of himself, Nagato's first thought is that this is confirmation of Sakamo being their enemy, leading them into this trap and using the same deception as last time. But this fades as he realizes that neither of them are carrying Tanto blades, and unlike last time, this is a place where hidden sand shinobi could plausibly be. This anger is replaced by a rush of shame at how easily he gave into his biases, and so the redhead turns his attention back to saving Yahiko. Thankfully, Conan at least is level-headed, and so she wastes no time with mental accusations, instead pulling out Jiraiya's scroll. She then prepares to open it, but is stopped when with a twitch of the puppeteer's finger, the metal monstrosity belches a torrent of flame which incinerates the scroll, cutting off their only lifeline. The woman then barks at them that if they try anything like that again, they'll snap this kid like a twig. To prove her point, the puppeteer has his puppet's pincers tighten around Yahiko, making the boy grit his teeth in pain. The man then calls the puppet back to him, telling the Konoha contingent to turn over any documents they have found and surrender, or Yahiko dies. Knowing that the policy of the major shinobi nations is to sacrifice a comrade if it means the success of the mission, Nagato is already ready for an argument when he tells Sakamo they have to do what the Sand Shinobi say. However, to everyone's surprise, the white-haired man agrees, telling Nagato and Conan to give him all the documents they've gathered. Still suspicious, Nagato asks why Sakamo is doing this, and Sakamo smilingly replies that Yahiko is his comrade, and he'll never turn his back on a comrade. That's his ninja way. Something like respect for the man blossoms in Nagato's chest at this, and so he does as he's told, handing Sakamo the documents. The White Fang then tells the Sand Shinobi to let Yahiko go and take him instead, saying that a Jonin is far more valuable than a Genin, so he'll make better insurance. Nodding, the man slowly has his puppet drift closer to Sakamo, the tension of the situation etched on his face. Sakamo in turn steps forward, one hand outstretched with the papers they've collected, and the other raised in a gesture of surrender. Outside, a slight desert wind kicks up, sending a faint gust through the room. This unbalances the papers, and so on instinct Sakamo reaches out with his free hand to catch them. Nagato with his enhanced eyesight is able to see all of this, but the Sand Shinobi do not. All they see is their enemy making a sudden movement, and so they respond in kind, with the man flicking the finger controlling the pincers down sharply. Nagato screams, knowing the horrific sight that will come next, but in doing so prevents it. All around him, some divine force pushes everything backwards, causing even the tower to crumble. Looking up, Nagato sees the puppet in fragments on the floor, with Yahiko lying beside it, injured but alive. Conan and Sakamo lie behind him, seemingly uninjured, but the same cannot be said for the Sand duo. The man is clearly dead, his head caved in by a chunk of falling sandstone, and the woman is not far off, the shuriken she had raised against them now embedded in her own chest. Tears fill Nagato's eyes. He didn't mean to do this. He never wanted to hurt anyone. He just wanted his friend to be safe. Then, as if his heart was not broken enough, the woman pulls a locket out from under her top and stares lovingly into the picture as the last light leaves her eyes. Stumbling over, Nagato inspects the image. It is of the man and woman he just killed standing together, smiling down at a boy with her eyes and his hair. Through a voice strangled with tears, Nagato cries that he's sorry, but in his heart he knows that this is just as worthless as the apologies of the men who took his parents from him. No one says anything as they gather around Nagato, laying their hands on the boy's shoulder. Finally, when Nagato believes he has no more tears left to cry, he wordlessly begins collecting the documents scattered in the blast. This silence from Nagato persists for the entire journey home, with the only exception being the grunts he gives when asked a direct question by Sakamo. All three of his comrades do their best to cheer him up, with Yahiko even seemingly mended fences with Sakamo in the wake of his declaration at the tower. However, Nagato cannot get that boy off his mind, the one he orphaned, the one who will now be forced to know his pain. When they arrive back at the village gates, Sakamo tells Nagato that he doesn't have to come with them to the Hokage's office if he doesn't want to, encouraging him to take the night off and rest. Nagato nods, and as the others depart, he turns back and begins to walk out of the village. At first, his pace is a stumbling walk, but it quickly becomes more sure-footed, picking up speed with each new horrific thought that enters his mind. The life that child will have, the look on his mother's face when she died, the day he lost his own parents, and the inescapable truth that he has become a part of this war whether he wants to be or not. By now he is sprinting, leaping from tree to tree, as if he can somehow outrun his guilt and shame. He does not know where he is going, but that doesn't matter. Nothing matters except his refusal to be another tool in the cycle of war and hatred. From behind him, Nagato hears the calm voice of Jiraiya-sensei muse that he didn't take Nagato for a runner, since he figured he'd be smart enough to know that running from problems doesn't fix anything. And when the boy looks back, he sees the Sannin hot on his trail. Nagato asks if Jiraiya's come to take him back to the village, but the older man shakes his head, saying he's just come to talk. He then body flickers ahead, grabbing Nagato, and before the redhead can stop him, seating him beside him on a tree branch. In a sympathetic voice, the Toad Sage then sighs that Konan told him what happened during the mission. Nagato is at a loss for words, and without anything to distract him, tears once more begin to flood his face. Exhaling deeply, Jiraiya says nothing, simply putting an arm around the boy's shoulder and allowing him to weep into his own. Finally, when Nagato is all cried out, Jiraiya tells his student that what happened wasn't his fault. It was a tragic accident, but Nagato shakes his head, saying that isn't true. It wasn't really an accident, since in that moment, when Yahiko's life was at stake, he didn't see the Sand Shinobi as people, he just saw them as a threat that had to be removed. And he hated them for it. Jiraiya nods gravely, saying this is all part of growing up, coming to understand feelings like hate and pain, since only by understanding them can one reflect on them and come up with their own answers about how to respond. Nagato breathes that he doesn't have any answers. All he knows is that he doesn't want to inflict that sort of pain on anyone else ever again. With a hint of his usual chuckle, Jiraiya asks if he really thought running away wouldn't cause more pain. Sure, he wouldn't have to cause it by fighting anymore, but what about the pain Konan and Yahiko would feel at being abandoned? That Jiraiya would feel at losing someone he's come to care deeply about? A few more tears leak out of Nagato's eyes as he says he doesn't know. It feels like no matter what he does, it will cause someone to suffer. He then pleadingly asks his sensei if he has any answers, because at this point, he'll do anything. With a sad sigh, Jiraiya admits that he doesn't have an answer, though what he believes is that one day people will be able to live in peace and understanding with one another, but only if those who believe in that future are willing to work for it, to fight for it if they have to. Nothing great ever comes without cost, but that is why shinobi exist, to bear those burdens so that others can live freely. Nagato asks what about those who are lost along the way, and looking him squarely in the eye, not as his master, but as another person who knows the guilt the boy is feeling, Jiraiya tells Nagato that all they can do is make sure those deaths are not in vain, by never giving up on the dream of peace, since that is the only way in which their sacrifice means anything. Nagato nods that he thinks he understands, and so rising to his feet, follows Jiraiya back to the Leaf Village. He cannot change the past, but he will honor the people whose lives he took, by ensuring that the child in the picture will know a world of peace. This is his vow, as a shinobi. And that's where we'll leave things for now. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this part, and if you did, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts, suggestions, or screams of rage in the comments below.